Welcome to She Sells Radio. Today's episode is for you if you are a solopreneur, a startup leader, or a founder who needs to build out a high converting sales process. Don't we all, right? Or if you simply want to improve your existing process and want to learn from a pro. So, my guest today is Belal Batrawy. He's a 7-time startup seller who has typically joined as one of the first, if not the first, sales hire. And I met him through the Salesforce Top Sales Influencers program. He's also been hugely recognized and awarded by companies like LinkedIn, Crunchbase, SalesLoft. Frankly, too many for me to list out, or else we would be here for a long time. But just know that he is someone you want to learn from and follow. And he knows what he's talking about. I also know that he's about no fluff. So I know we're going to get into some really good tactical tips and strategies that you can use today to grow your sales. So Belal, welcome to the podcast. We are so glad to have you.
It's an honor. Thank you so much for having me, Elise. I'm glad to be here.
Yes. Oh my gosh. Glad to have you. And, to be a 7-time involved in 7 startup sales, right? You got to have some guts.
You got
And
some issues. I
or
probably
maybe.
need some therapy at this point. I don't know why I'm addicted to it.
Oh my gosh. You know what's so funny? One of my clients literally is starting something like that's specifically therapy for startup founders because there is so much
I
just
believe it.
need for that out
I
there,
believe it.
right?
I believe it.
How
Yeah.
did you get involved in this world though? Was this what you thought you were going to be doing forever, or what
Not at
kind of led
all.
you
It
down
was
this
just
path?
lucky. The company that was most serious about hiring when I got out of university happened to be a startup. And it was a startup that sold to other startups.
Ah,
And so not only was I in a startup growing within it and learning, and that one went IPO, which is a complete, like what luck, how
yeah.
many companies actually go IPO. The startup I joined within 5 years had gone IPO. I was there for 3 of those 5 years. So I saw it grow from 500 people to like 2,500 people in 3 years. It was crazy.
Wow.
Yeah.
Mm. Oh my
And
gosh.
and then, like I said, we were selling to startups. So that's all I knew. And I was like, hey, this is fun. Are they all
Mhm.
like this? And then I found out they're not at
Oh.
all. But I didn't know any better. I was like, they must be all this great. Let's keep doing startups.
Oh my gosh. Oh my gosh. So you would come on. So for someone who, you and I were chatting a bit in the pre-chat about our listeners, and we've got a really diverse array of listeners. If someone is not as familiar with the space, you would typically come on as either like the very first salesperson when a company is transitioning from founder-led sales, or you'd be one of the first to come on. Is that
Yeah,
right?
that's right. And
Yeah.
back in the day, that used to be at somewhere around like 500,000 in revenue. But
Okay.
the way things are today, it keeps getting earlier and earlier because companies can raise really healthy seed rounds that
Yeah.
can justify paying somebody to do sales. So founders typically will hire a seller a little bit earlier now. But
Mm,
yeah, it's early days, 0 to 1 or one
yeah.
to 10, that journey. And they're both like very different from each other.
Yeah. Oh, for sure. For sure. And, I think for today, I know we're going to talk sales process, and this really applies wherever you are in your journey. You're going to get something from this that applies, whether you are a founder and you're doing your own selling, whether you want to hire your first salesperson and you're like, how do I do this? How do I empower them to be successful? Or you're in sales and you want to learn some things that are going to help you improve how much you're selling, how much you're closing, you're going to take something from this and apply. But what I think would be really interesting to start with is, how does one build a sales process from scratch? I don't know if we even have enough time to cover all that in the episode, but
It's a
I know
lot.
that's one of your specialties. So why don't we just start off with like, what are some of the core things that someone should be thinking about if they are building that out from scratch?
Yeah, it's a great question, and it is a very complicated one. And the way I like to think about these things is the nature of startups is there's more to do than time to do it, and
Mm,
typically there's more questions than answers. So when you're in a state of like ambiguity like that, and it's actually easier to know what not to do than what to do.
hmm.
Like think of it like a multiple choice exam where you have no idea what the right answer is. So process of elimination, you go, well, I know it's not A or D.
Okay.
So now I got a 50-50 choice between B and C. Like that's a much better place to be than you're just staring at it being like, I have no idea what we're doing here. So
Mm,
it's always easier to find out what the wrong answer is and then take that off the board. And then that again, that narrows the universe a little bit more of possibilities. And you want to keep narrowing. And The hardest thing that you have to fight as a early stage seller or even a founder selling is, this the FOMO that we feel when we narrow things, when we narrow the scope. Small
Mm,
is better. Small is always small lists, small, tightly defined ideal customer profile, small marketing budget. Small is better because that forces you to commit. You get better results when you do that, and you can then make the adjustments you need over time. So
mm.
I'd rather do one thing for 1 week and know if it works or not than try to do three things over 4 weeks and not be clear about any of them. Right.
I
I
want to
want to,
just pause. Yeah, I'd love to pause on what you just said, that because I know as a founder myself, right, there's so much pressure. There can feel like so much pressure to just expand, expand, expand. You got to grow the list, you got to grow the targets, you got to grow the, obviously that's important. But what I'm hearing you say is specifically when you're first launching something, having that small focus list is, that's a good thing. Like we want that, right? How do we know when we're focused enough? How do we know when we've niched down enough?
it should be manageable. Like, I was
Okay.
just dealing with a founder where I asked him, okay, tell me who your ideal buyer is. And he starts giving me a list and he's like, companies between 50 to 500 employees. And I'm like, okay, this is time out right there. I'm
Mm,
like, what's the difference between a company that has 53 employees and one that has 497? Because technically, both those fit your ICP, right?
mm,
What you just told me
mhm.
is a great buyer to you. But you and I both know a company with 498 people and 53 people are completely different. And
Yeah.
yet you just told me both would be ideal for you. They're not. So right away, it's like it has to be the top end, whatever the ceiling and floor is of whatever you're trying to focus on, whatever parameters you're putting on, should be restrictive enough that whether it was right at the edge of the floor or right at the edge of the ceiling, it's still pretty manageable. And
Okay.
like, how much can one person do in a given week or month? Like you don't have that much time, again, because there's more to do than time to do it. So
Yeah.
is it easier to say I'm going to take 50 accounts and try to get 5 customers from this, or say I'm going to take 5,000 accounts and hope to God I can get 5 customers from it? You can't work
Yeah.
5,000 accounts. That's not
Hmm.
manageable. It's not, you're setting yourself up for failure when you do that.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a great point because sometimes when I'm going on shows and sharing my own journey, like we were able to scale to 7 with um a very small community, like not a big list, not a big audience. And it was just that personal touch and that personal outreach, but knowing who your person is. Right. So I'm curious too, because um, you said it's better, like it's easier to figure out what not to do than what to do.
Yeah.
Do we just do that by mistake? Is that trial and error? Are there some things we can think about ahead of time before we make all the mistakes to figure out what not to do?
Yes. Yeah, great question. I'm going to steal something that I learned a long time ago from one of the top incubators in California, where they brought in a guest speaker and he said, the mentality you should have as a founder is a prototype to fail mentality. So that
Mm,
means I want to build fast and I want to fail fast,
mhm.
because that's the best thing that can happen to me is a quick failure. Like a prolonged failure is deadly because you can't
Yeah.
recoup the time that you invested in that failure.
Mm,
So like, I might be like to myself, okay, I want to start a coaching program. Now I can be coaching dentists, I can be coaching hairstylists, I could be coaching entrepreneurs, I could be coaching marketing leaders. Those are 4 completely different businesses, all of
right.
them valid. How do I find out what's right for me? Well, I'm going to pick one instead of trying to do all 4 at the same time.
Mm,
And let's say it's dentists, and I'm going to learn everything I can about the dental business, and I'm going to try to get 10 dentists. I'm going to have 10 conversations with dentists, lunch, and I sit down and spend an hour with them. And at the end of that week or 2 weeks or 3 weeks that it takes me to do that, I'll have a really clear idea if I'm actually going to be building this coaching business for dentists or not. And that's a very quick experiment. And then the next time I hire a coach to work with me, I could tell them, hey man, we are not going to touch a dentist. I tried that. It's a dead end. They don't need coaching. They don't like it. They're not willing to pay what we deserve. That's why our business is focused over here instead of over there. And that's prototype to fail mentality. I'm going to go fast. I'm going to focus on one thing. I'm going to find out if it works or not very quickly because I'm not splitting my concentration in too many places. and then I'll have a clear end in sight, a conclusion. And then from there, I can go to the next thing and the next thing.
Huh. And I love that too, because, and I'll just speak from the standpoint of a woman. Obviously, I don't speak for every woman. Everyone is different, but there is, like, I know a lot of the conversations I have with my clients they are about that fear of failure, right? Which I guess we all have to some extent. But if that is the goal, right? Let me fail as quickly as possible. It gives so much permission to say, oh, this was actually a success because I failed in it. Right. Kind of reverse psychology a little
Yeah,
bit, but I think it helps free us up to
it does.
just
The
go for
best
it.
founders do it that way. That's the
Mm,
best founders. Every startup that I've been with, and again, because I've joined so early, I was working
yeah.
hand in hand with the founders in almost all 7 startups. I saw the original deck, I saw the original idea, and
Mhm.
what we were doing at the time versus where it started was completely different. Like, wow, how did we go from, like, one of the ones, I'll give you an actual story, full story, was
Yeah.
one of the startups I joined. I was the first sales hire there. They're now a Fortune unicorn. When I joined them, they only had $1 million in recurring revenue. So really,
Mm,
they've exploded in growth. And I was employee number 30 something there.
mm,
And the original pitch that Scott, the founder, did was a product called, I think they called it Cow Paths. Like,
mm.
they didn't even have a company name yet. Can you imagine? They just
Wow.
called it Project Cow Paths. And they
Okay.
went out to people and they said, hey, kind of like cows walking through a prairie, if we could just show you where users are navigating on your website, would that be helpful to you?
Huh.
And it was hideous. The deck was disgusting. It was in this
Yeah.
like eyesore blue. I was like, dude, did you like, you
Mm.
could have at least picked a color that was like nice to look at. This is
Yeah.
actually hurts my eyes when it's up on the screen. Like, take it off. And he was able to get his seed round of funding just with that, and get about 5 to 10 people to commit that if they build it, they will try and use it.
Mm,
And
mhm.
that was a fail fast mentality. Like,
Yeah.
they didn't even sit down and start coding until they had some people committed to testing the idea if they
Yeah.
coded. And that was the right approach. And I would argue a lot of full story success comes from those decisions they made in those early days to
Mm,
really prototype to fail, to work fast. Is it easier to code an entire program or just build a PowerPoint, pitch the idea and get people
totally.
to commit to the idea?
Yeah. Yeah. So what I'm hearing from you there is don't be afraid to pre-sell either, right? Like I was working with a client last week and she said, gosh, she's in coaching. She said, I've always built my programs ahead of time and then gone and sold them. And I was like, I've always done the opposite. And
Right.
it wasn't because it was like, I knew to do this. It was more just, I just kind of did it because it just seemed like it made more sense. Like get people to say, yes, I'll pay for this and then build it. But so am I hearing you right? That if
Yeah,
you have control over that, if you are a founder, um, really be leaning into that more, like let's get people to put real money on the line and then build viable product and then build.
exactly.
Right.
Exactly.
Okay.
That's how you get
Okay.
your early customers. Everybody wonders
Hmm.
that puzzle of like, how do you get your
Yeah.
early customers? It's through those commitments in the early days.
How do you get, I'm curious, because this does tie in with the sales piece. How do you get someone to commit to something that isn't built yet? How would you approach that if you had a vision, it wasn't built, you've got this ugly PowerPoint, that's what you
Uh,
got. How
the
do you
the
sell the
right
vision?
yeah, first off, it's hard. So whatever answer I say, I'll say it and it will come off the tongue and it'll seem like, oh, okay, that's it. And it's like, but
Yeah.
that's actually putting into practice is very difficult. But
Right.
the right way to do it, or the way that I've seen most effective from founders that I've worked with, is emotionally charged messaging. Finding a problem
Mm.
that is just like a powder keg for the buyer that really sets them off. For example, in the case of Connectifier, which is one of the startups that I worked at that was acquired by LinkedIn, we knew that recruiters hate LinkedIn Recruiter, that they find
Hmm.
it stifling, that they think
Okay.
it's a gimmick because LinkedIn tells them, oh, you can send this many emails, and you have no idea if the person even logs into LinkedIn. And
Uh,
LinkedIn, by its own admission, says that I think over 80% of its users don't even log in once a month.
hmm.
So they tout this big user number, but none of them are active. And
Uh,
so LinkedIn sells this very expensive recruiter package, and then these recruiters don't have a way to actually reach out to the candidates that they spend all this time looking for.
yeah.
So we found a way to essentially get the emails and phone numbers for people so recruiters can reach out to them directly. And I remember John Jerson, who was the CEO and founder of Connectifier, saying that they interviewed something like 250 recruiters before they even wrote the first line of code.
Mm.
And in all these interviews, they couldn't find a single one that was like in love with LinkedIn. At best, people were neutral, and most of the time they just hated it.
Huh.
So that became the cornerstone of the messaging, which is like, you know how much you hate LinkedIn Recruiter? And they're like, yeah. And then we'd like let them go off for a bit. And it was like a little therapy session. People really hated it. So you need that kind of emotionally charged messaging. Like, what's the powder keg of emotions that your buyer has over a problem? And
Mm.
you want to build around that. And if your
Mhm.
PowerPoint focuses on that, or your presentation or your company deck starts with that problem and why it is, and you dig that knife deep, you'll find people responding, like for sure. Like
Got
people
it.
will lean into that
Got
and
it.
cut you off and be like, well, let me tell you another thing that's not on your slide. Right?
Which is great, right? Because they're bought in at that point.
Mhm.
Yeah. So I want to come to me that naturally lends itself to a bit of, okay, how do we price things, especially early stage? But before, so just know I want to go there. Before we go there, is there anything else we should be thinking about when building, like anything else major that we should be thinking about when building that sales process from scratch? I know you talked about niching down, eliminate what doesn't work, kind of
Yeah.
work it that way,
I,
but anything else?
be very flexible in the list building in the early days. So people
Okay.
think the messaging is what matters most. It's important, but the list building is actually the most important thing. And it
Mm,
should be a sort of a process that changes every week and every month,
right.
because you'll build a list. Hopefully it should be a very small list, 50 to 250 names or
Okay.
contacts or companies. It shouldn't be a big list. It should be something very manageable. And as you start making your way through that list and having conversations with people, getting responses by email, etc.,
Mhm.
you're learning, right? You're getting these little learnings, and it
Yeah.
should make adjustments to the list. It might cause you to blow up the list and start from scratch, and that's totally okay. That's, again, that's a good thing. That's prototyping to fail and realizing, okay, this isn't the right list to be working. But everybody focuses on the messaging. They put this like big emphasis over here, and I'm like, the messaging means nothing if you're not giving it to the right audience. It's
For
all about
sure.
audience building in the early days.
Okay. That's a really good point. That's a really, really good point. Anything else that you think we
Well,
should
I'll
cover
tell you
before we
right
talk
now, just to the
pricing? Yeah.
pricing point that you raised,
Yeah.
like whatever pricing anybody comes up with, myself included, even when I went out on my own, is wrong.
Yeah.
Like your first pricing is going to be wrong, and just accept that, embrace it, realize it. And
Okay.
that kind of, again, gives you permission, some sort of freedom to be like, okay, I know it's going to be wrong, but let me just throw this out there and start here and then see what happens.
Yeah. Yeah.
Every founder I work with no exception, has completely underpriced their product.
I was just
With
going to ask, is it
no
underpriced? Is it
exception.
overpriced? I was guessing everyone was underpricing. Yeah.
Completely underpriced. I mean, we're talking sometimes multitudes of 10, 15, 20. I've had founders have to increase their pricing 50x, which to them was like, they're like, having a panic attack. And I'm like,
Right.
believe me, 50x it and watch, nobody will bat an eye. I kid you not.
Wow.
It's
Yeah.
just,
Yeah.
we discount, I think, heavily, because we think the analogy I'll give is this to your listeners: nobody buys a cheap diamond. If I came today with a
Mm.
high quality, you know, big, it's great carat size, extreme clarity, just a quality diamond, and I told you it was $200,
I
you'd
wouldn't
be
trust
like,
it.
yeah, you
Yeah.
can't trust me, right?
Yeah.
Because you're like, a diamond of that quality shouldn't be $200. It should
Mm.
be like 20 grand.
Yeah.
Like, it's so unbelievably cheap that there must be something wrong with it,
Ah,
right?
yeah. Yeah.
But
Mm.
we think to ourselves, well, I'm giving them a no-brainer deal, right? This should be a no-brainer. And it's like, if you're giving somebody truly something of value, of quality, then the expectation is I should pay for that quality and value. And if
Yes.
you discount too much and you undercut yourself too much, you actually enter an even more dangerous territory where then people get skeptical. And then they're like,
Mm.
well, clearly it's not valuable. Clearly I misread the situation. Clearly it's not quality. And now I need to poke holes and figure out what's wrong.
Ah, so glad you said that. I'm so glad you said that because it's something I know I did in my journey starting out. I know a lot of my clients too, like when I do one-on-one work with them, we'll look at their pricing and it's like, oh my gosh, how are you charging this little for what you do? Like it's so good, but it's so common.
Yeah.
How, for the example of you got a 50x your pricing, like how does someone get past some of the mindset pieces with that? Because that can feel really uncomfortable to go out and pitch at 50x what you just charge. Like, do you tell people just go do it and see what the response is? And
Yeah, it will. You're right. It does take a dose of courage to just like completely change your pricing like that.
Mhm.
I will say this as a practicing Muslim, we
Yeah.
have very core to our belief that you should always seek counsel, seek advice, seek guidance. So I've always been surrounded by kind of like coaches and mentors and things of that nature, whether from religious or personal or professional.
Sure.
And those are the people I lean on to like call me out when I'm doing something like this wrong. I will say it's a lot easier to do if like yourself, like a coach like yourself makes it so much easier to talk to somebody that is like a third party neutral in this, to be like, hey, here's what I'm doing. And then they can set you straight. Like just very recently, I met with Larry Long Jr. from our group,
Oh, yeah, yeah.
asking him about like what to charge if you were going to be speaking. And
Right.
in classic form, what I thought was to charge was easily, I think like 15x less than what or
Yep.
like undercut. He's
Mhm.
like, you got to 15x that, be that. And I'm like, are you serious? Larry's like, you got to. Well, like otherwise you're gonna get laughed out of the room. I'm like, seriously, that's how bad I was. Dang.
Yeah, because we just don't know, right? We
We
don't
just
have
don't
the
know.
context. And when it's our own product too, we naturally probably undervalue
Yeah, we
because
do.
that's
We do.
how the
We
mind
do. And like
works.
I said, what we don't realize is you overpack value to such an extent where it actually becomes dangerous and
Mm,
causes the cheap diamond effect where somebody goes, well, there's something wrong.
wow.
Why am I getting so much value for so little? That's not how things work. Therefore, there must be something wrong here.
How do we know? I appreciate what you said about everyone gets it wrong at first, right? So just go ahead and accept that you're going to get it wrong. It's okay. How do we know though when we've kind of started to hit that sweet spot in terms of pricing? Is it we're getting we're still getting yeses, right? But it may feel it feels stretchy to us to offer it at that rate, but it feels like a good exchange, but we're getting yeses. Like how do we know?
That's a great question. I like to hear people give me a little like when I say the pricing, just like a little like,
Okay.
when you watch those
Mm,
shows where they're going, it's like a couple buying a home
yeah.
and they always pick a home that's right outside their budget. Like it just happens almost
Yeah.
every time. They're like, we set 300K and they're like, that home's 325. And they're like, oh, but it has everything we need.
Yeah.
Right. And now
Yeah.
they have to make the decision. That's perfect pricing when you're
Yeah.
just slightly above what somebody's willing to pay. And
Mm,
now instead of negotiating on the sum, you're negotiating on that difference.
okay.
So it's like my
Mhm,
budget was 3,000 and
mhm.
you're 3,500. Is there anyone who can work with me on that 500? And it's like, sure, I can
Mm,
work with you on that.
mhm.
And now you're just, you're working on that difference instead of the lump sum. That's how you
Got it.
know your pricing is working or you've kind of found a good spot. You want a little bit of resistance. It shouldn't be so much that people go, wow, like I had no idea it was going to be that much.
Yeah.
That then either you're talking to the wrong person and their
Mm,
expectations were set wrong, or your pricing is just way over in
mhm.
comparison maybe to the market or the average that they
Sure.
typically would pay for that product or service.
Got
But
it.
like a little resistance is so good. That means you're like in the right spot.
That's great to know because I know too, for anything I've invested in that I've really valued, there's been that like, ooh, it feels uncomfortable. But I think as a buyer, we get more out of something when we have to stretch a bit for it,
Exactly.
right? So
Exactly.
they get a better result. If you're This is super helpful, by the way. So thank you. If you're pre-selling something you haven't built yet, right? So you're pre-selling your minimum viable product. Are there any tips for pricing that? Like I'm assuming you might do, this is the early, or excuse me, this is the lowest it's ever going to be. You're getting some sort of a discount because we're building it as we go. Like anything, any good verbiage or wording or just rules of thumb with
Yeah,
pricing those
it's so
products?
important in those situations, at least to drill into the contrast. So
Okay.
normally something like this would cost blank.
Mm,
Blank would only get you X, Y, and Z. I'm willing to offer to you for this, and this includes X, Y, Z, and 1, 2, 3, and I'll lock you in at this price for a year.
Ah,
And so now
okay.
it's like a really clear contrast in value. And it's like, look, the only reason why I'm offering you this is because I need early adopters that are willing to give me something more valuable than money, which is feedback. That's the
Mm,
expectation. So while you think you're getting a discount, I'm asking what I think is something far more valuable, which is your time.
got it.
I want you to take this seriously with me, help me build it, as long as you see the vision of what it can be like I do.
Oh,
And that kind of a pitch, it does two things. One, it actually makes people who aren't willing to commit nervous, because you just said to them,
mm,
hey, I want something more valuable than your dollars, which is your feedback. And they're thinking to themselves, am I the sort of person that gives feedback like that? No, I'm not.
mm,
And they're going to hesitate. And that's
yeah.
great, because you want to filter those people out, especially when you're pre-selling. The worst thing you can do is get a bad customer early on. I can't tell you how many times we've walked away from deals at startups that I've been at. We mentioned Connectify earlier. We had a deal where we sold to recruiters. We had Robert Half, which was the fifth largest
Yeah.
staffing company in the US, want to buy Connectify for $1 million contract.
Hmm.
And at the time we were a $2 million company. So we would
Wow.
have literally, like gone from 2 million to 3 million
Yeah.
overnight. And we
Yeah.
walked away from the deal because the idea of supporting something like Robert Half at the size we were at did not make sense, even if they're willing to give us $1 million check.
Wow.
Sometimes you
Hmm.
have to walk away from bad customers early on because they're extremely dangerous to the business. They can actually bring it down.
That's huge. I
Um,
mean, I think from a couple of, I just want to hone in on what you just said, because that had to have been really hard to say no to. I'll put
mhm.
it that way, right? That was
Yeah.
probably really hard.
My commission check from that was very hard to say no to, because I was
I'm
like, what?
sure. Yeah. Yeah. Which speaks to, I think, a few things. And I want to hear your thoughts on this. One, the importance of vision, right? What are we really doing? Um, Integrity on your part. And then third, it's like, just because someone has a lot of money doesn't mean they're a great client for you. They could be a bad customer for you,
They could be a very bad
right?
customer. In fact, sometimes the oftentimes actually the best customers aren't the ones that pay the most. They're the ones that find the most value and pay the easiest.
Mm,
So easiest and
yeah.
most are not the same concept. And as an early stage seller, it's really easy to get distracted by big accounts and think, oh, I'm going to close Oracle, I'm going to close IBM.
Right.
And it's like, is IBM a good customer, or is like a middling e-commerce brand that's growing a great customer, because I'm going to sell them easily
Mm,
and we're going to grow with them as they grow as a business. And
yeah.
so you have to make those decisions. And that goes back to the point I said about when you make this contrast in your pricing. On the one hand, you're going to weed out people that aren't a fit by putting it that way. And on the other hand, it's going to be very polarizing, very, very magnetic for the people who are a fit, who go, that's me. Yeah, I love giving feedback. I love trying new things. That's, you're talking about me, and they lean in even harder, which is great.
Got it. That's so helpful, I think, to know that early on too. And to be willing to take a stand for like who's a great client, who's not, be willing to turn people off and turn them away. You get to stay in your power as you
Yeah.
build that out. So one final kind of area I want to speak to, and then I want to ask you a couple closing questions and where people can connect with you. So I know we have a lot of founders listening who are currently doing all the sales
Mm.
themselves, who are really excited about getting some of that off of their plate, right? They want to hire a Belal, right? They're like, how do I do this? How do I do it the right way? I think a few things. One, I've heard you should expect that sales will drop when you bring on your first person. So knowing kind of what to expect as a founder, maybe that's not always the case. But then two, how do we find the right person and set them up for success? So it's kind of a multi-part question.
It's tough, and you're right. When you do hire that first seller, sales will drop off. And I would recommend this, which is, it's not doable for everyone, and I understand that, but hiring in pairs is a superpower. When
Mm,
you can bring in two people and they learn together, their ability to learn and get over any whatever learning curve you're presenting for them is going to be massively accelerated than if you
okay.
hire a single person. So hiring in pairs is a superpower if you can afford it. Obviously, many companies can't.
Sure.
And the profile you're looking for, again, the mistake founders make is they think, well, I need somebody senior that's done it before. And actually, those people have far less drive, far less need to prove themselves, far less chip on their shoulder. And you'll find them being actually very kind of not, I won't say lazy, but they just won't bring the same effort as somebody
Mm.
who's actually needs their big break.
Yeah.
The hiring profile that we would typically look for at startups that I've been a sales leader for early sellers are ones that are looking for their big break. They're at a company today that's not giving them their chance to move
Got it.
up. And they're thinking to themselves, man, if somebody just gives me a chance, I'm gonna nail this shot. Like I will take it all. I'll take all the responsibility. And they're actually excited by the idea that they're going to be challenged, that they're going to be given responsibilities that don't fit their job title, that they're going to be expected to think creatively. Those are the right people. So it's usually people who are like in the mid part of their career. Like, for example, if I was going for an early stage sales hire at a SaaS company, a software company, I'd want somebody with about 2 to 6 years experience, no more, no less. Not less than
Got
2,
it.
because if they come to me with less than 2, I still need to train them how to sell, which is its own mountain to climb. And then our situation is another mountain. So I don't want to present them with 2 difficult things to have to learn at once.
Mhm.
And I don't want to have more than 6 years experience, because at that point they're pretty tenured.
Right.
And odds are they should have already have gotten their chance at some company they've been at. So that's like a very typical profile. And the way I set them up for success is I want every month to be their best month, every quarter to be their best quarter. So
Mm.
instead of setting goals, because who knows what goals are? I mean, I've seen founders just literally like make up goals. And I'm like, where are you
Yeah.
getting these numbers from? Like, it's
Yeah.
totally made up. Like, how can you give somebody a set of goals that you have no clue if they can be hit or not?
Hmm.
Set minimums, right? Instead of setting a
Mm.
ceiling, set a floor. Like,
Okay.
here's the minimum. We expect that at a minimum, this month you can get 1 customer,
Got it.
right? A minimum this year, you can get 10 new logos. Okay. Now,
Mhm.
anything above that minimum, I will greatly reward you.
Okay. Mhm.
And anything below that minimum means failure. Like we're clearly something's not
Not a
clicking.
fit. Okay.
That's a much better way to say we have a goal this year of getting a 30 customers. Based on what? Based on what? Your desire, some
Mm.
spreadsheet
Yeah.
math that was done. Like that's not, that goal can easily be debated if it's
It-
fair or not.
It's so interesting you put it that way, because when you said that, set the minimums, my brain went to that's so interesting, but how do you keep people motivated if you're doing that? But to your point, if you hit above that, I'll handsomely reward you. And it's who you're bringing in, they're inherently going to be motivated, right? So hiring that right type of person
That's right.
is key.
That's exactly
Yeah.
right.
Yeah. Gosh. Oh, I learned so much today. This was incredibly helpful. I want to ask you a bit of a curveball question, but I'm just curious, I appreciate that you brought up your faith earlier. And it's something that sometimes when people come into this podcast, they're like, I thought I was going to get a bunch of sales tips. I'm actually like learning a lot about consciousness and spirituality and all, because that is important to me.
Hmm.
But I believe I read somewhere about you that just one of the things you're focused on in your life is kind of ascending beyond materialism, and that obviously your faith is very important to you. I'd love to just hear how that works with, obviously, in our world, there's so much focus on money and achievement. How do you incorporate your faith into what you do to stay grounded? And then I guess tell us a little bit about what that looks like for you. I think that's so important.
Yeah, thank you for asking that, by the
Yeah.
way. I appreciate that. Well, it's not easy, first off, being in sales, to say I'm not money driven. I've definitely
Mm,
rubbed some managers and sales leaders in the past the wrong way, just saying that,
yeah,
because I think the expectation is you're supposed to be money driven if you're in a sales role. And that's goes against the culture, I think, in some places,
sure.
some sales cultures. I had a Christian coworker of mine many years ago tell me something, and since he taught it to me, I never let it go, which was he had set up a separate account where 10% of his commissions went straight into the account. And that
Mm,
account was just for him to do all the charitable work that he wanted, whether that was helping fellow people from his church, in his community, and so on. And I'm like, what a brilliant way to like bring meaning to the money. And now he felt
Yeah.
motivated seeing that bank account growing every time he got a commission check.
Wow.
And ever since he did that, I did the same. And I set up a second one for that. And it really helped me over the years feel healthy and good about my connection to
Yeah.
making that money in commission. Because I kept thinking to myself, with every check, 10% of it was going to go in there. And whatever percent's comfortable for you, that's
Sure.
what he did. And that's what I did. But that really helped me. And that money has been what I get to do all the things that I really then enjoy, which is like,
Mm.
the charitable work and so on. And that helps me bring a religious aspect to the job. And again, creates like what I think is a healthy connection to the money.
Yeah. Oh, I love that so much. That's super powerful. So final two questions for you. I love when I have a man on the show, I love giving him the opportunity to honor a woman in his life just because it's She Sells Radio, right? So I just want to open it up for a woman in your life. And I know sometimes it can be hard to narrow down a woman in your life who has created a huge impact. And what's the number one thing you've learned from her?
So yeah, I'd go with my wife. I have to
Yeah.
go with my wife for sure.
Mm, mhm.
We've been married for 11 years now. And I think among many things that she's taught me, um, I, I have gotten so much more better at just being patient and learning how, you know, social relationships are just so messy and confusing, and patience is like arguably the like one of the best things that you can have when dealing with people's issues and problems and so on. Patience leads to then you being forgiving, making amends, bringing back together ties that get fractured. And I think that's been probably one of the best things she's taught me over the years, is just how to be patient, how to control myself, how to realize that when things go beyond my expectations or control, patience is always the thing to fall back on.
Oh, that's been one of my hardest lessons of this life because I'm not naturally wired that way. So
No, I know.
shout out to her. She's
Yeah.
I think that would be one of the hardest lessons to master, but that's incredible. I love that. Bilal, thank you so much. This has been like, I've learned so much. I know my listeners have as well. Please tell everyone where they can go to connect with you further. I know you've got a newsletter coming out as well, a blog coming out that they can subscribe to. So tell everyone about where they can go to connect with you more.
Yes, I try to post daily on LinkedIn. I've been better at it lately than I was just a couple of months ago. So on LinkedIn, you'll find my content there. And I have a newsletter that's coming out, deathtofluff.substack.com. In the next week or two, that will be released, and I'll be sharing more content there.
Amazing. Amazing. So deathtofluff.substack.com. We
Right.
will link that in the show notes. Thank you so much for your time today and for your heart and following the curveball questions when I threw them at you. I think this was just a really powerful interview. So thank you so much.
I appreciate it. It's an honor. Thank you.
Absolutely. Absolutely. All right. To you, my listener, go connect with Bilal online. I want to just remind you that if you are a woman looking to break through your first six figures and start earning 10K or more a month, you can head to elisearcher.com/10K club. And then of course on elisearcher.com, we've got all sorts of resources, goodies that you can take advantage of to grow your sales, your abundance, and your life. Thank you so much for being a listener of She Sells Radio. I'll see you on our next episode.